Okay, I am honored to introduce Jack Whitsett, which all of you know already. Um, he's a man whose spiritual path led him to our congregation nearly 30 years ago. You will hear about his work in the environmental field through his legal training and how working as a volunteer in the audiovisual booth started more than 60 years ago. You can tell by how inept he was with, no, how he turned on the microphone. Jack describes himself as focused, and I describe him as our Hollywood star, and hopefully he will tell you why. So I'm excited to turn the focus on you and your life odyssey, Jack.
Very good, thank you. It's very nice to do this today, and I hope that I can move along adequately so it does not become boring. I'm following Kathy's interview questions that she gave me, and I had tried to fill out each one of the questions, at least with some kind of answer. The first one is, where were you born and raised? And the answer to that is, I was born and raised and lived for 30 years in Hollywood. And my parents built a home when I was 10 years old in 1952 in the Hollywood Hills, not far from the Hollywood sign. And so whenever I see that on a photograph or a TV program, I'm reminded that that's where my parents' home was. And actually, I was born, as I just said, in 1942, and in February of that year, and World War II had just started. And my parents had put off having children for a number of years during the Depression because they didn't want to deal with that situation. And then when I was born, I don't think they were expecting a war to begin. So my father had to serve in the Navy for most of World War II as a medical officer and on a troop transport ship. And so by the time that the war was over, we got our family back together. I have a few photographs here, including some of myself when I was 10 old. And then the next one is the same birthday time, and that's on my parents' back porch as a 10-old. And then Alexandra will go to the next one. There we are. I had built using some wheels and a cart that someone had given us. That picture is taken down in Palm Desert, where my parents had a trailer in a trailer park, and that's where they went on various weekends to get away from Los Angeles. And then I built that thing that towed by the bicycle, and my brother is on the back there. And we don't know who the little girl is. Apparently she was someone that also lived in the trailer park there. So anyway, the next picture is a picture of my mother in 1980. She was born in 1903 and my father in 1902. And so they were, by the time, this was taken about 1980, so she must have been in her mid-70s by that time, as I am now. So those are a few slides. We'll move to the next one. There I am. What I really like to do is to hike in the Sierras and other mountain regions of our state here, or other states for that matter, including the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. But that's a picture that was taken this past June up in out of Bridgeport at the Twin Lakes Resort. So those are some of the, and then do we have, let's see, did I have one more picture? Nope, next one. Nope, back one. That comes up later. Okay. Okay, the next question that we were asked was, what was your religious upbringing? And my parents, for a number of years, had been members of a First Congregational Church of Los Angeles. And that was, is now called, I believe, UCC, right? United Church of Christ. But in those days, it was called Congregational. And I was in the youth program there from the time I was in kindergarten till I finished high school in 1960. And then I was not involved in any church organization for the next 25 years. I was sort of out of it. So, and I'll get back to why I came back in 1984 or 5. The next comment topic was siblings, and we can now turn the photo off of me standing there because I'm up here. And I have one brother. His name is Jim, and he lives in Pleasant Hill, down in the East Bay, and he and his wife live there and have for a number of years. And Jim is 3 years younger than I am, so and he's doing well. Talked to him yesterday. So that's the only sibling I have, and he was an officer in the Air Force for his career, and then he went in. His topic was personnel management, and then Jim left the Air Force and retired from the Air Force, and then became a personnel officer for several corporations in San Francisco. Next topic was your parents' birthplace and occupations. My father was born in Missouri, or Missouri, as you wish. They say Missouri. And my mother was born in Michigan, and the father was born in 1902, and my mother in 1903. So they met in a hospital in San Diego because my father was a surgeon at that time, and I suspect it probably was in the late 1920s when they met, because he had become a surgeon and was on staff at a hospital in San Diego, and my mother had come totally independently to California and San Diego as a registered nurse. So they met there, and then they were married, and then what would it be, something like 10 or 12 years later, they had their first child, and here I am. So the other thing about family traditions I would mention is that most of my family comes from England or Scotland, that area. And although, like, what's her name, the presidential candidate is what's her name? Kathy? See, when you get old. Um, what was her name? No. Warren. Thank you. Got it. We do. My mother's family was alleged to have some ancestral connection to the American Indians, but I don't know whether that was a rumor or had some truth. We have no idea. In England, my parents' names, my family's name was Whitsett before they came to the U.S. in 1792, and apparently when they probably pronounced it in the British style of Whitsett instead of Whiteside, as we would say. So that's probably where our name was shortened or written down wrong as Whitsett. And then there's another group of relatives that are Whitsitt, S-I-T-T, instead of S-E-T-T. So we've done some research on that over years. The next question I had was, what challenges did you face, and particularly in school, from kindergarten through high school? And probably, as many of you know, my biggest problem was the lack of ability or skill to play combative sports. And I just wasn't balanced adequately to bounce balls and throw things like that. I've always been okay on running and hiking, and I've climbed Mount Whitney and things like that, but I have never been able to throw a basketball into the hoop. So I was considered to be incompetent and generally was disregarded for that reason of not being able to play combative sports. I think combative probably too strong a word. Yes, competitive. Good. Thank you, Kathy. Then the next set of questions had to do with education. And the first question was, what drew you into your field? And as you know, I have been an attorney for 44 years before retiring in 2014. I started out at UCLA with a major in finance and business administration. And after I graduated from UCLA, I went into the Navy because I was an ROTC student and served in the Vietnam War on an aircraft carrier as a regular deck officer, and you know, that's the group of us who actually drove the ship, so under the captain's orders, of course. So I did that for over 2 years off Vietnam, and then I served 10 more years as a reservist on destroyers in Long Beach and San Diego. So I guess I had close to 13 years total time as a Navy officer. And when they decided not to pay them anymore and that was a decision made by one of our presidents, I forget which one it was, that they didn't need to pay reservists anymore, not really needed. That's when I decided it would be best to leave, so I did. It was not a commitment anyway, it was just something that I had volunteered for. So the next question was, how have you applied your education? And I practiced law for 44 years, and I am a graduate of the law school at USC in Los Angeles. And initially I worked for the County of Los Angeles for about 9 years, and then for a few additional years I was the chief counsel for the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and actually helped form that agency. It's still down there. It represents the 4 counties. Yes.
It's the biggest air district.
Yes, it is. Right. And I was the founding attorney for it, and served there for several years also. And then I went to work for Kaiser Steel Corporation, and also working on environmental law. And then in 1990, however, I had become married to Belinda, and I decided that we should, I was actually had enrolled as a state employee a few years before that, about 1987 or so, as a managing attorney for the central staff at the Court of Appeal in San Bernardino. And then we decided that we would come up here into Sacramento, because my wife Belinda had found a job up here, and it was easy for a state employee in Southern California to move to Sacramento. Many are employed. So I moved up here to work for the Department of Health Care Services, which I did for 24 years. So, and generally the work I did there was is the relationship between the state of California and the federal government in the operations of Medicaid, which we call Medi-Cal. So that was very interesting academic work, and I really enjoyed it, and retired from that duty, as I mentioned, in 2014. So the next question on the list was, did you, I went over the jobs already, so I won't go over that again. But did you receive any awards? And if I did, I don't recall any. That's right. Now the achievements is the next topic. What achievements? And I think probably the one that is most clear to me is the one that I mentioned a moment ago, and that is helping to create the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Because by that time I'd practiced the environmental and air pollution law for almost 10 years, so I was experienced. So we started I helped write the statute that formed the agency, and then when it was formed, I became the first chief counsel, like I mentioned. So that was probably the achievement on your list. Next on Kathy's list is family, marriage, and children. Huh? And in this connection, how am I doing on time? 10 more minutes? Okay. In family, marriage, and children, I have been married to my wife, Belinda, who some of you know. She used to attend here at the church, and for various reasons got distracted into other requirements. Today, the problem is, because my daughter, who has our granddaughter, is somewhat disabled with chronic migraine, my wife has become the chief deputy assistant parent for the granddaughter, whose name is Alice and is 5 years old. So that's fundamentally what she does. My daughter was born in 1980, and her name is Laura, and she's the one that suffers from the incidental migraines and all of that. So we hope the doctors will figure out, or the scientists will figure out some kind of treatment that would actually work for migraine. But there's nothing yet that's helped her. So, but she tries everything that they suggest. Right. The granddaughter Alice, we will now bring that photo back up. There she is. And that was a photograph that was embedded a month or so ago by some kind of a camera or photo processing unit somewhere that my daughter found. But that's Laura, and is our granddaughter. And as I mentioned, Alice was born in 2013.
I want to be sure that you get in how you met Belinda and the path you went on.
Right. I met, and then Kathy had a topic here called significant events in your personal life. And that's the most impressive, that's the most significant event, is meeting Belinda. Not that I hadn't dated other ladies, but meeting Belinda was very impressive because she had, when I met her in 1976, she had recently divorced from a prior husband and had moved to California with a friend to get away from Louisiana, or was it Mobile, Alabama, somewhere down that way. Anyway, she had moved out here, and I met her in a adult class we were taking, and on some kind of political philosophy or something group, and it was very nice to have met her. And 2 years later we were married, and now it's 40 years later, and here we are. And Belinda wanted to come today, but she was caught up with taking care of the baby. So
I
anyway,
think you told me that you were libertarians at the time.
yes, we were.
And met
That's
at
right.
like a political type rally.
Right. It was a group in Los Angeles that was libertarian rights. Yes, that was, and of course that was long before we came here. So. Okay, next, that just leads right into the UU history item on the list here. And the first question she had was, how long have you been a member? And the answer is, I guess it would be 27 years, because we joined the church in 91. And so we've been here for those years. And what brought you to UU? That's an interesting story, because Belinda and I both attended a spiritual practice group in Pasadena that did not meet at the UU Church of Pasadena, but was associated with it. It met in a UU member's home, and I think we had something like 10 or 12 people in this group, and it was recommended by a friend that just thought this would be interesting, so it was a spiritual practice group in Pasadena. And then when we moved up here to Davis in 1990, we heard about this church. That's the same church that runs the group in Pasadena where we went to. Although, as I said, it was not at the church, and I do not recall ever having been to the Pasadena church. But in any event, we came here shortly after arriving, and we both joined the church here in 1991. The next one was activities you are involved in here. And as most of you know, I'm the administrator, but not a teacher, of the several of our spiritual practice groups here at the church. And the first one that was formed was led from a class taught by Jay Atkinson and Janelle Curlin back in '91 that Belinda and I both took, called On the Path. And shortly after that, in early 1992, Janelle decided, and many of you may remember her, she decided to form a group called On the Path. And so for the rest of the year she was here, probably until around 2000, she was the leader of our On the Path group. And when she departed, I took over the admin part of that, because I never pictured myself as a teacher or leader of the group, but I was certainly able to be the administrator. And here we are in 2019, I'm still doing it. So, and we have a couple of other groups also here that meet here at the church that are on a similar path. The other task I've done since I believe 1992 was the audiovisual. We used to be back in this other corner, as some of you will recall, and then we built the new booth. That was great, and so now I moved over there.
I want to interject. When he was a teenager, he did the AV at his church that he went with his parents to. So he's been very interested in AV.
Yes, that's true. I should have mentioned that. Because at the Congregational Church in Los Angeles, I did serve on the audiovisual team. Same thing. Of course, we didn't, in those days, we had no video, so there wasn't any February themed trust for us to look at.
And I know we are going to have to wrap it up, but
yes,
you've served in some other positions here that have been very key positions.
Various committees and so forth. So that's sort of
He's been board secretary for a long time.
And I also serve on the I've served on the Personnel Committee and also on Adult Religious Education Committee, ARE. So let's see, she also asked, what hobbies and sports do you have or like? And none. That was easy. 0. And then, what are some words you would use to describe yourself? And I think that most would say worker bee. And I've often thought about the fact that, and this is probably obviously just a personal observation, and that is that I find my work to be interesting, fun, and encompassing. So I really don't, have, my parents used to watch television. I really don't. I sit in front of my computer and schedule the AV team. And then, excuse me. Then she asked also, has any of your life been recorded through printed form, radio, or television? No.
Well, it has now,
Oh.
and I really want to thank you, Jack, for
That's it.
sharing the highlights of your life.
I should add one other thing, and that is that I had also brought some notes and readings from our various spiritual practice groups, but we won't do that right now because it's, unless you all have time to listen to a reading or two, to give you a flavor of what we're talking about. Can we do that? It's short.
I think we want to say, too, that there are different classes or groups that meet at different times. And so maybe a time you couldn't meet or you wanted to be in that group but couldn't, look at the other things that are available because they all offer a lot of spiritual growth opportunities. And how many do you participate in?
3 here in our church and then 2 others in the community here in Davis. So I'm aware of 5 groups. There are probably more, of course. But I try to attend 5 per month and so on. There's one group that's weekly, but the rest are all monthly meetings. But I'll read, there's a writing by the Reverend Bill Houff, Houff. Apparently he was the senior minister at the church where Beth was an intern, something like 30 years ago. And I'm not sure that Reverend Bill Houff is still living, because he was even in those days fairly, not aged like I am, but he was aging. So anyway, he wrote the following, and he's again a senior UU minister when he wrote this, and he wrote a book called Infinity in Your Hand. And this is a short quote from it, but it also reflects the perspective of our various spiritual practice groups. He wrote, within the limitations of linear language, the following paradigm comes as close as I am able to come in describing how I currently make sense of the cosmos. Imagine a vast ocean, formless, infinite, eternal. Mighty surges of energy stir the depths and sweep the surface of this cosmic ocean, expelling myriad droplets of water, each unique, finite, and transitory. The ocean being infinite is all there is. That being the case, it cannot be described as matter or mind because the infinite includes them all. We call this ocean by many names: God, Allah, the Tao, Brahman, cosmic consciousness, supreme identity, the ground of being, and the infinite. Although distinct, those transitory droplets are also part of the infinite ocean. But separated as they are, finite and unique, we call them life, matter, stuff, existence. To the degree that these droplets acknowledge one another's being, they focus upon separateness and, except for a forlorn longing for relationship, they miss seeing their cosmic connection. This means that they also forget where they came from, who they really are. They may have intimations, religious experience, or mystical intuitions of who they actually are. but the ego keeps getting in the way by insisting that it is the primal ground of the individual. As finite fragments of the infinite whole, the droplets can never comprehend the whole except upon awakening and awareness. Still, there is longing, intuition, and finally returning. With the return, the previously perceived finite multiplicity is revealed as an illusion. It is, in the words of the mystics, not two, not two. Bill Hauff, UU minister.
Thank you for sharing that, Jack. And if anybody has questions of Jack, or Diane's still in the background, come and join here, ask your questions. But thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.